Excellent. Just making sure everyone can see the slides. Great. So let's go ahead and today we're gonna just myself going. I'm not used to not sharing, so that's interesting. So I'll quickly review the purpose of today's meeting, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the key themes that came up during our one-on-ones. I was able to meet with everyone, which was great. And then I'll do some level set of the foundation for shared understanding. You'll see that in the key themes, there was some varying degrees of how people thought about the work or specific definitions. And so I'll kind of go in there. I kept them separate from the key themes so we can really think about what people were saying during those one-on-one conversations. And then after we do some of that shared understanding, we'll start looking at some of the roles of the everyone in the system, but then we'll narrow it down to specifically the Stewardship Council because that definitely came out in probably three-fourths of the, if not all, of the interviews. There was some misunderstandings or lack of understanding of where we're all at. And then finally, where we'll spend the bulk of the meeting is really talking about our next phase and where we're moving into. So next slide. And so basically, the purpose is to reconnect the Stewardship Council to its role in stewarding the network. Just want you to know that we're not starting from scratch. We've reviewed the previous role, we've reviewed the partner agreement, which were the previous change models. When the CHIs and Thriving Together met last year, we've brought that information back to you, but we've reviewed those emerging future documents, all the one-on-one conversations, and we started updating the stewardship role based on all that information. So today's conversation isn't about recreating or having the discussions again that we've had previously. It's about building. So there's going to be some familiarity, but you'll see that we're going to just build building and going deeper into the conversations that we've had previously. And so next slide. So first one-on-one conversation, you can go to this next slide. One of the first key themes that came up is that the vital condition framework resonates, but there's a depth of understanding that varies. Some council members generally understand the framework as an upstream, holistic, cross-sector framework for improving well-being, while others see the framework as positive, asset-oriented, and broader than traditional social determinants of health. Some see it as deeply systems change framework, while others understand it more generally as a things people need or pillars of well-being. So you can see the varying degrees of how we're looking at the framework itself. Next slide. The next one was the purpose and structure of the Vital Conditions Network was still unclear with many. Many could describe the spirit of the network, connecting organizations, reducing silos, leveraging resources, and helping see their work as a bigger picture and a regional vision. But they were less clear about what it actually is. Is it an agreement? Is it the vital condition grantees? Is it those who come to the learning sessions? Is it the CHIs? Or is it really a broader movement? Or is it just a bunch of people coming together in this non-formative way? The next theme I heard is that the network's value is in its breadth, but people want it to become more action oriented. You guys saw that it's different than other coalitions because it's broader and more holistic and cross sector. It serves as an umbrella connecting issue specific work like housing, food, youth, behavioral health, environment, digital equity, thriving natural world. But you don't want it to become just another meeting. You want to really move from, have clearer pathways from conversation into some coordinated action. Next slide. Stewardship was meaningful. You all were able to really describe what that was. But the role of the Stewardship Council was less clear. And there was varying degrees. Some could describe it. A couple of them were nailed it, I would probably say, and those are probably the ones who've been on it the longest. described it as a think tank, an advisory board, ambassador group. And some said, I have no idea. I was asked to come and came and here I am. And so I think it's really important if we're going to be stewarding and looking at the future of what we're building here, that we're really all on the same page about what this group is about and what its role is. And we'll dive deeper into that a little bit later. So the next one was multi-solving. This is a term that we just recently started using. I know Okanagan Chai uses it a lot. I think it just started being used in the Stewardship Council. So I asked everyone what did it mean to them. So there was definitely a mixed understanding of the word. Some defined it as one strategy that addresses multiple vital conditions, and other defined it as multiple partners solving one issue. So it was a little varying degree. So we'll dive into a little bit of what multi-solving is a bit later. I will say that some people just said it's just jargon. So fair enough on that one. Finally, the last theme that really came out is that everyone is aligned on the upstream root cause work, but we want to ensure that we're including downstream partners. Um, the downstream are really giving us the why behind the recurring crisis. But at the same time, we don't want direct services or crisis response organizations sidelined. They see the partners as essential because they're the closest to the consequences of system failures and can help identify practical upstream solutions. So we want to make sure that we're continuing to include them in the work that we're doing. So I'll stop there. Those were the key themes that really came out, and see if there's any questions before we move on defining and kind of coming to a shared understanding of some of the confusion or mixed understanding that we had. That silent 7 minutes, awkward pause. All right. So let's go. Let's move on. I'm kind of coming through this fast because I really want to get to our discussion. I don't want to talk at you for so long. So let's start with the first one, the vital conditions framework. Next slide, please. So the vital conditions framework is more than just a list of things people need. It's a systems change framework. So that was kind of the varying degrees to what this framework was, is what people need. It's just these conditions out there. And some were thinking it's really a systems change. So kind of level setting. It is more than what just a list of what people need. It's a systems change framework because it helps us look beyond individual programs or problems and ask what is needed to change so more people and places can thrive. So we're looking at upstream conditions, relationships, policies, resources, opportunities. We can start to see how different conditions are connected, how the gaps in one area affect others, and where coordinated action could improve well-being across a whole community. It's not going to tell us exactly what to do. It's going to help us organize around what matters and to see how the conditions are connected and work together toward well-being and justice. I'll stop there and see if that helps clarify or if there's other questions.
Wendy, when you describe it that way, are you describing it based on kind of the national context, or did this
Yes.
come out of the interviews?
I the national context. So
Okay.
the interviews were a list of things that people need all the way to systems change. There was a continuum of understanding.
Okay.
And then I, of course, the national was brief, and then I just added to it just to help bring understanding. Monty, would you add anything, or Stacy?
Yeah, I guess the only thing that kind of sticks out for me, Wendy, is um, yeah, there's a number of both ands. I think, sometimes in the simplest sense, the one of the advances in the vital conditions is being very specific about what assets are needed for people to thrive, and they're less abstract. A lot of the social determinants of health was something that we still use, but it was more of an abstraction and it wasn't clear. So a simple list of what are those assets. And of course, what's central to this is that it is decidedly place-based and puts relationship and community at the center of it. So the premise is, you know, healthy places produce healthy people contribute to healthy places, and they're inextricably linked. And whole people, whole communities, those types of things. But I think so there's multiple ways that we might describe a holistic framework. And I think one of the reasons why it resonates with a lot of folks is you can have systems leaders that see the systemic elements of it that are helpful, and you have grassroots leaders that can say, yeah, this makes perfect sense. It's intuitive. It's easy for me to understand, unlike some other frameworks. And that's part of where the value lies. So nothing different than what you're saying. I just think there's a number of both hands in there.
Thank you, Monty. Anyone else? Okay.
And perhaps just double clicking on the, the values orientation, Monty, as you were saying, right? It's a thriving natural world. It's humane housing. We're actually pointing to what that looks like or whatever with our values.
Thank you, Stacy. All right. Let's move on to the Vital Conditions Network. Like I said earlier, generally understand the spirit of the network. And there was a little bit of confusion about it is. So the Vital Conditions Network really is that regional movement of organizations, coalitions, community leaders, partners working together to strengthen the conditions that allow people and places. And so it's not, there is some variability in participation. You have those who really have dove deep into it and are attending learning sessions, attend the summit, are really starting to look at their work through the lens of the vital conditions. There are others that are members of the network that have signed up because of some benefit that they would get, whether it be Catch a Fire or the Vital Conditions Grant. And so we're trying to, at the moment, really map out the maturity of the vital conditions, where the network partners, whether they just signed up to take advantage of a benefit, or if they're really buying into the vital conditions framework and starting to shift how they're working within that framework. So we're really wanting to look at the network more of a movement, or those individuals, partners, organizations who say, yes, I believe in this work. I believe that we can make lasting change. I'm tired of doing the urgent services time and time again. We really need to disrupt the system so that we can move into more people, places, thriving, no exceptions. I will stop there. See if anyone have any comments on that or would like to add anything to that. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I like how you said it too, because I think it's almost in a way we should start thinking about it as a network of organizations who are trying to lean into this. So it's a component of like emphasizing and creating a region with a shared language and vision. And it could almost be like that network of people who are actively trying to figure out how to do that and what kind of supports are we providing to those organizations. Doesn't mean that everyone can't use the language and can be part of it, but it's almost like a learning collaborative in a way of how do we learn to get better at the vital conditions.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to multi-solving. Like I said, some members understood it as one solution addressing multiple vital conditions, and others thought it was more about multiple partners solving one issue or a task force focused on a problem. We're just saying that it's not multiple people at a table, but it's how are we looking at an issue and creating a solution that addresses multiple vital conditions at one time. And so just as an illustration, I put a little apple tree in here, and planting an apple tree is a multi-solver because it addresses the basic needs in health and safety by providing fresh apples, local nutrition. It addresses belonging because it becomes a place where people can gather under the shade and share and connect under the tree. It's thriving natural world because it supports pollinators, birds, soil, shade, and clean air, as well as climate resiliency with shade, cool space that reduces heat. Lifelong learning because we can learn about it and the foods, the seasons, how we take care of it, and stewarding. And it's meaningful work and wealth because it connects to local food businesses, farmers markets, youth employment, job training. So you can see how just one tree, one solution is addressing multiple vital conditions. And that's really what we're talking is if you're really wanting to disrupt systems, instead of looking at solutions or that will come to a program to address one thing, we look at solutions that say, looking at all the different vital conditions and how are they addressing multiple vital conditions at one time. You may not address all of them, and that's not what we're saying. We're just saying how you hit three or four, for example. Makes it a little more holistic. Monty, Stacy, would you like to add anything to that? Okay. All right. Sorry, Peter, I just saw your chat. I think working together is aspirational. Yes, definitely. So I threw in this slide because I do believe we need to start to bring clarity. There was some information, we did talk about this in some of our conversations, the upstream, midstream, downstream. So I just want to provide some a little bit more of a visual and put some terms to these words. So when we're looking at upstream, we're looking at changing the conditions so fewer people experience crisis. So this is prevention before prevention. This is way upstream before you even need prevention programs, so to speak. Midstream is really those prevention programs supporting people earlier before challenges become crisis. And then finally, downstream is really responding to those urgent needs when people are already in crisis. So I just want to make sure that we're differentiating because sometimes we're throwing around upstream when we're talking about a food bank, for example. And we want to say it's food bank because we want to say it's upstream because it's preventing them from being hungry. When in reality, it's still that urgent service and can be some midstream work depending on what you're doing at the food bank. We're talking how do you get all the way up to food security? So we're not even needing food banks, for example. Kind of brief little definition there, some clarification. Just want to make sure. Go ahead, Dr. Wallace.
Mhm.
Hey, thank you. This is really helpful. And since your earlier slide, I've been thinking about that kind of the dichotomy of organizations that do upstream work versus organizations that do downstream work.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I'm trying to think of an organization that only does one or the other. And I feel like so many of our organizations might do a little bit more of one or might do a little bit more of the other. But there are very few organizations, I think, that don't have an opportunity to do both and all. And I would worry about, thinking about this organization only does this or this organization only does that, even if it's the majority of what they do, because I think it'd be great to bring in organizations that might traditionally do more downstream work, but have this huge opportunity to really contribute to upstream work. And so that's kind of just a thought I'm carrying right now.
Thank you. Monty, I know you and I have talked about it, so you have your hand raised. I'll let you dive into that.
Yeah, I appreciate, what Dr. Wallace is saying. I think it's true that there's probably a continuum for sure in a lot of different organizations, even if there may be, groups that are, providing more urgent services as a primary, modality and huge opportunities for sure. And I think you even pointed this out earlier, Wendy, that those that are really in the trenches, whether it's housing or food insecurity or people that have experienced some sort of economic dislocation that are serving them have opportunities to be part of the understanding of the challenge and co-creating solutions. And this is really minor, but I think one of the things that is the upstream, um, we might consider it's like not just creating conditions so people won't experience crisis. We want to work upstream so that people are thriving, so that we're not trapping human potential, so that people are actually leaning into their purpose. I was just reading Vivek Murthy's blog today, which was really around the two sides of mattering, that people have purpose, that they have opportunities to contribute. So the one thing that we know from a measurement perspective is that we can't urgent service our way into thriving. So just preventing people from being in crisis doesn't do that. Our goal is people living their full potential. And I think that's one of the reasons why there's lots of folks really resonating with that, that we are creating the conditions where a lot of people are not experiencing the opportunity to live their full potential. So I think this kind of traditional public health lens of upstream downstream is really helpful with that kind of nuance that, there's more of a continuum here and that we're really trying to get people to experience thriving, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Go ahead, Claire.
This might be really obvious, but I'm just going to say it anyway. But I think one thing that I'm just sort of mulling around in my head a little bit, looking at this slide, is just how downstream services like that urgent needs response is often much easier to fundraise for and to find funding for. That people really respond to crisis. Like I'm thinking right now with the fires, people are, in a beautiful way, jumping into action and wanting to respond and help people who are experiencing this immediate crisis. But I think about how much harder it is to get funding and for upstream, and how maybe part of our work together can be thinking about how to better communicate that with the larger community so that those groups who want to do more upstream work can receive the funding that they need to do that work well. So anyway, just pondering that.
It is very true because it's a lot of the downstream work you're meeting, it feels good you're meeting those immediate needs. And sometimes you can have that instant gratification of something that you put in place right there. Whereas systems work can take years to actually see results. Welcome to
Yeah,
public.
it requires like a more kind of, with for lack of a better term, like a sophisticated donor or funder to be willing to wait for results.
Right. Anyone else want to add to that?
Might just extend what Claire just said because it occurs to me that it's easier to make the case for funding for those upstream conditions when you have data, because sometimes you can actually tell a pretty big, powerful data story, maybe more so than the triage or response to some of the downstream crisis, because it's positioned in a way that you can get maybe broader impact if you're working a little bit farther upstream.
Mm-hmm. Peter, did you have something? I see you come off mute.
Yeah, I was just also realizing that the timeline between intervention and the results and the time or the linkages you make to outcomes with this upstream work is challenging. I mean, we all know that. So you have to, continue to make that case, those linkages for funding, but also encourage people to take the long view, and that's what we're doing.
Right.
I really appreciate what Claire said, but I think the analogy of how do you? Sorry, Kelly, I see your hand up. I butted in. I see the analogy of plant the garden today to harvest the fruits later, kind of being the what we're trying to do. So knowing if you plant 5 seeds of cucumbers that you're going to have 30 cucumbers at the end of the season or throughout the year to eat, right? Like that's the return on an early investment. But how do you stop a teenager from smoking and getting lung disease when they're a teenager to 60 years old, that's a 50-year commitment, right? Of doing work now to try to keep someone from, creating habits or to doing the system differently for someone 50 years from now. And I think in a lot of the work we do, we're doing it in cycles of 2 to 3 years, which is really hard to find the foundation to say we're going into a 40-year project.
Thank you. Kelly?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Ruben. And I was gonna build on what a few folks are saying, but I think as John is naming the network as a learning community, I mean, I really see us as a collective of organizations needing to really form different practices and different habits of ways of working. Because I think Dr. Wallace is right. So many of our orgs are doing all these things, and having been in the middle of one for 7 years, the urgent needs can just overwhelm, your staff, your resources, your time. And so even at the organization level, building different habits and practices so that you are continuing to invest in that longer view, that's a practice shift and in how we work. And I think that's it's one of the things that I'm here for, of learning from the network to keep, how do we build those practices together.
John?
Yeah, the thought while I'm hearing everyone too is I think the thing we kind of continue to think about is in some ways the gap we're trying to fill is to create the environment and network for people to lean into this work and do it better. I don't know that we need to fill or develop a network of people leaning into urgent downstream and midstream services. I think those exist and those roles do exist, and partners are leaning into that. So I think sometimes we get into trying to bring partners along and trying to figure out how they fit. But I do think it's worth challenging partners to think about their work and what part of their work is more upstream vital conditions based, and how can we support them into leaning into that work more or growing and expanding that work more. I think so it's a balance of creating the environment and challenging everyone to come along with us.
Oh gosh, one quick thing about that I'm thinking about, Monty, the learning session we did on belonging, that also to challenge the idea, some of this upstream work doesn't need to take 40 years. Sometimes it's a mindset shift of how we're approaching the young people that we're working with, for example, that is seeing the full potential of that young person in front of you can happen overnight, in terms of the work we do. So I also don't want to put that changing the conditions that are facilitating thriving and full potential is also within our reach. So it's not we're not just here for the decades-long investments, just to name.
I think that's a really good point. Some of, it's a lot of these are both ands, at least in my view and experience, as we're starting to fundamentally change certain indicators. We may see some of those 10, 20 years, but to your point, there's a lot of these things, particularly if we have a more holistic view of not just changing a chronic disease, but we're actually changing people's relationships, their sense of self, their opportunities to contribute, which in turn affects a lot of other decisions that they personally make, can make a big difference. And Wendy and I have been talking a little bit about this, and just as a quick aside, Epic, is funding the work that, the Community Initiatives is doing in the Bay Area, and it's around reimagining childhood. And it's reimagining childhood in one of the most concentrated poor areas called Pittsburgh and Contra Costa. And it's bringing both together all the home visiting programs that connect all these vital conditions to both reimagine what that continuum looks like through a life course. And what does it look like to really center belonging? And what does it look like to center connection? And how do we build skills? How do we learn and act together? So I think a lot of this work ends up, and it's of course based on brain science and everything else. When we start to look at things more holistically, then we start to see the value of looking at upstream, midstream, and downstream so that we're able to increasingly move more of this work, I think, which is the whole point that Wendy putting this out here, that moves us more and more people to those upstream experiences of thriving. But some of that work and that innovation stuff can happen pretty quickly, these disruptive innovations, and we can start to see changes in how people experience belonging or experience connection or experiencing places. Anyway, sorry for my side jaunt
Yeah,
there,
and I
Wendy.
think sometimes as you get those mental shifts, the mental mind shifts, then you can start to have some culture change and systems can start to actually move a lot faster.
And to Claire's point, real quickly, so that's epic. By the way, if you can check out Judith Faulkner's work, she's going to be spending down $10 billion, right, before she dies. She's 82 years old. And I think there's a lot of funders that are saying, what are holistic approaches that really account for food insecurity, housing insecurity, that are doing it in a solution-oriented way that's not just kind of perpetuating urgent service delivery. That's what I think a lot of foundations and investors are looking at, the both ends. Looks like
Yeah.
Maria has her hands up, Wendy.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Maria.
Hi, sorry, I'm chiming in a little late here, so sorry if I'm going to say something that's already been said. But thank you so much. I'm so excited that we're having this conversation. Um, I feel like if you are an organization that is working in that downstream, like you're in that immediate need and you're working, your direct services, I I if it was me, I would probably feel super overwhelmed if it was like, hey, let's talk about like upstream and like, let's make that shift at least a little bit and lean into what upstream looks like. Because in my mind, most likely I'm probably working with some scarcity. I have clients coming at me all day long that I'm like, I can't even stay on top of the work to be able to take care of them or have the funding to be able to do it. So to even think about upstream would be like, I'm too much in a sense of urgency to be able to do that. And I think one of the things that could be really powerful in helping making that culture shift is as we move upstream, we need to move in larger groups and larger coalitions. And so it's not all on you. And for it to sustain, and if it is 40 years to make that systems change or however long that the mindset kind of moves away from like small organization trying to do it all on your own to like this really big body that you're being held in.
Thank you, Maria, for acknowledging that. So let's move on and talk a little bit about operationalizing the vital conditions. And so we've kind of talked a little bit about this and what does it mean? Because I asked everyone, and Ryan was my first one-on-one, and I think that came out of ours. And I think I just off the cuff said, do you think people know how to operationalize vital conditions? And she was like, no, flat out, not really. And then I asked everyone after that, and I think everyone said no, flat out immediately. And so there is this disconnect of like, what does it really mean? It's really good to say, yes, we're doing the vital conditions, but we're all looking outwardly of what's happening within the coalitions or within conversations outside of individual organizations and not looking inwardly of how are you addressing or how has your organization truly looked at how you can situate the framework and your organization together and your role in community well-being in the community. And so what does that really look like? And so when you start to think about how is your organization, we'll start inwardly of looking at how are you creating an organization where there true is meaningful work for your own employees and there is a sense of belonging for your employees, for example. And before you even start to look outward, and then how do you understand your role in community well-being? How are you communicating how its work contributes to thriving? And how can you identify connections in other sectors and make choices that strengthen the upstream conditions? And there's varying degrees at how our partners are doing this work. So I'll move on to the next slide. And this is just me proposing these levels of adoption, not set in stone, didn't find them anywhere, but this is kind of how I was thinking about it. You can have organizations that are partners within this network or a part of the CHIs or the regional coalitions that have adopted it because they are aware of the framework. So yes, we like it. We like it. It's great. Then you have some alignment where you can name some of the vital conditions that your work actually touches. So I'm doing this and it touches basic needs, or doing this and it touches thriving natural world. If you go a little bit deeper, an organization that's adopted is applying it. They're using the framework in their strategic planning within their own organization or within their storytelling or evaluation or how they're allocating discretionary funding. So in different levels, maybe not in all those areas, but they're starting to apply it inwardly in the way they actually do business. And then finally, probably most mature is where they're actively collaborating with others to strengthen one or more of the conditions. So I'll stop right there to see how does that resonate with you and when you're thinking about like operationalizing and the different levels. Do you agree, disagree, feedback?
I just have a question,
Sure.
Wendy. I feel like this makes a lot of sense. I would be curious though if I almost feel like action could come before application because I feel like there's lots of people that might be working to strengthen a vital condition but don't outright and maybe know that. I feel like that's where we come in a lot of the time to loop people in to say like you actually are already kind of doing this and this is where you fit in if you want to, hop on this really fun train. But just thinking about how a lot of the time, I mean, maybe they know it without its name, if that makes sense. So maybe those could be on, maybe application is like the highest tier almost, like it's like action combined with application, I guess.
Yeah,
Um,
good point.
just a thought.
Good point. Anyone else?
Yeah, I was looking back, Wendy, just I thought the language you used earlier in your overview about how the vital conditions are a systems change framework where folks are seeing beyond their individual organizations to recognize how coordinated action will really move the needle on community well-being. And I think that's why I'm with Rhiannon about there's some combination of action and application there, where it felt like that systems change definition was even stronger than at least just the way that you've outlined action here.
Peter, I'm sorry, but we're not able to understand you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's better.
So yeah, I have my camera off because I'm in the car. It's kind of distracting. But I think the challenge is somewhere in organizations, you know, actually recognizing what they contribute to the framework. And I'll use an example of a organization that I know well that's heavily involved in the healthy natural environment. But in some ways, humans are an afterthought, and that healthy natural environment is a thing in its own right. And yet, we all know that humans are part of the natural environment. We really thrive on it. So, bringing them into the awareness of what they contribute and then seeing how they connect to other people in what we would call a network. I feel like that's it's a real challenge. I think it's where the where the real benefit is when people do see that. And it's somewhere between maybe, 2 and 3, I guess.
Mhm. Okay, good point, Peter. So let's move on so that we can get to our next steps too of really moving into the change model as we had discussed previously. So looking at the Stewardship Council role reset, I did want to give you, can go next slide, a broad overview. This was a graphic. I just updated it quickly that has been shown to the Stewardship Council before in a previous meeting. But this is kind of the whole system together. You can see Thriving Together as the backbone organization on the left, and how our board is providing the three strategic direction and fiduciary responsibility for our organization. And then we are supporting the Stewardship Council again as the backbone, which is really about the alignment, strategy alignment, and activators. I didn't change that language. You'll see a little bit slightly different. It all aligns, or it's all in the same thread in the document, because this was already created, and I'll go back and change this so it's updated once we really look at that document and agree. But it really is about the strategic alignment of the network, kind of pushing it forward, creating the change model of how we're going to do things differently so that we can achieve the great stride, or increase the number of people thriving and decrease the number of people suffering. In that, we have our three CHIs, and we have currently 3 funded regional coalitions. And I kept them together because you have the CHIs that are really place-based, and the 3 regional coalitions that are really issue-based together, that are bringing different partners together around these issues. And then we have all of our community partners that, whether they're individuals or they're organizations, maybe they're smaller, hyper-localized coalitions. So I didn't want to neglect them in the whole system. And we are all moving towards the ultimate goal of all people, places thriving, no exceptions. So this is the broad overview. So now let's dive deeper a little bit into, let's see. Let me come back to the slide first. Let's go into the roles, and then we'll come back to the slide. Sorry about that. One more. So let's talk about some of the roles and expectations that we have for each of those groups. So we have Thriving Together that's been acting as the backbone. These are the roles, expectations that have been defined for a while when you've originally seen these graphics. We are communicating and providing that network infrastructure to create the condition, to help create those conditions, or help the coalitions and that create the conditions for change. We're providing some data infrastructure. We are providing some advocacy conditions so that where we're doing the Hill Day, we've done some leadership, help with the Leadership Institute with the Community Foundation in North Central Washington, and now doing a deeper dive into advocacy work. So doing some training around that. Doing some convening and capacity building, and of course, investment and innovation work. So driving it from that backbone perspective. We have our CHIs, which are local weavers and catalysts, and they are place-based. So those are all county level coalitions, where Thriving Together is regional. They do that local convening and capacity building. They have that those opportunities for community voice and context and priority setting from the county's perspective. And they're driving local action and systems change, and they are stewarding and co-leading the network. Let's go to the next slide. Did we have, do you know, there was one other slide before that one. I thought before it. Huh. There's one where there's the regional coalitions and community partners. Next slide. Yep, there it is. 22. There we go. So We have our regional coalitions, which are very similar to our CHIs in that, but they're issue-based. So you have the Food Council, talking about food security, and the food system. You have our digital access coalition work, which is bringing those, talking about digital equity. We have TREAD, who's really talking about thriving natural world, and all of those are regional. Again, issue-based convening and capacity building. They're also bringing in regional expertise and shared learning, providing advocacy systems change, and their cross-county alignment and opportunity setting. And then finally, we have our community partners, which is the hyper-local action and community voice. So they're bringing community voice lived experience. They're that frontline insight and local relationships, the action in their own sphere of influence. So their sphere is generally a lot smaller. They are having a feedback loop on needs, gaps, and opportunities, and optional but encouraged participating in the CHI and regional coalition tables. And then finally, we have the Stewardship Council role, purpose, and role. We have that. So this is in the document that I did share. So this is going to dive a little bit deeper to help bring some shared understanding of your role in this work. So first, we have hold the shared vision. This is about council members helping to keep the network focused on the long-term goal of all people and places thriving, no exceptions, and helping to ensure the work stays grounded in the vital conditions framework and focused on improving well-being across the region. It is really holding us to that strategic mindset and the where and the ultimate goal of all people, places thriving, and not getting sucked into the immediate emotional downstream urgent services, which is really easy to do because of the compassion that we all share here. The next one is bringing the regional insight. So the council is quite diverse in your expertise that you bring to the table, as well as your geographic, um, where you're at geographically. So you're bringing what you're seeing and learning from your communities, from your sectors, from your organizations, coalitions you attend, or different groups meetings that you attend, and lived and learned experience. You're helping identify patterns, gaps, opportunities, and areas of readiness across the region. And you're bringing relevant community or partner insight back to the council to help inform the network's direction. So it's not that you're doing the action, but you're bringing all that knowledge back into this group to help inform the conversation and decision making as we move forward. Third, you guide the strategic direction, and you help the network think about strategic questions, identify opportunities for multi-solving and collective action, and make meaning of data, community voice, and partner experience. I'm not saying that you're going to go forth and we're going to create this action plan and you're going to go forth and do the action. You're identifying those opportunities for that multi-solving and action that we can then bring back to the network for them to do the collective action. How can they have those conversations about working together to multi-solve? Finally, you're strengthening connection and alignment. And I think this is a really big one for this group because you serve as connectors and ambassadors for the Vital Conditions Network in your community. You're going to help identify where partners, coalitions, work groups, and regional efforts may be aligned or where they may be disconnected or duplicating efforts. And you do this so the network can strengthen connection and reduce unnecessary duplication. You're sharing out relevant information and opportunities within your networks as appropriate and help invite relevant partners, perspectives, and community voices in the work. In the simplest terms, you really are the ambassadors within this community for this work, for the network as well as the vital conditions. So it's really why I wanted to have that shared understanding. It's really important that you understand the vital conditions framework, you understand the network, so that when you're out and you're having these conversations, you're able to articulate it well so that others can then understand it. And if you don't feel like you do, I'm happy to have more conversations to really walk through it and talk through it and even have those conversations with you so that you do become more comfortable in those conversations and are able to articulate it in a way to help others understand what it is. And as Ryan talked about, there's plenty doing a lot of this work out there. They just don't know how to name it, and don't see it. How you can bring them in to the network, not so much as that we're growing numbers, but you're bringing them in with other like-minded people so that you're not on they don't feel like they're on an island on their own, and they don't feel like they feel like they're supported and they can see others doing the work, and then they can start to do interconnections, cross-sector partnerships, and doing the work collaboratively with others. I'll stop right there and see how that resonates with you. Someone has their hand up. Maria, you're muted, or I don't hear you. I don't see your mute button, but I don't hear you.
Great. Thanks. Thanks, Wendy. This is really exciting. Thank you for laying it out so clearly. I'm curious, is there like a strategic plan for this group?
We are working. That's part of this is all leading up for us to have the conversations around about that actionable theory of change. Like, what does that look like? So it's not going to be a strategic plan, because a strategic plan is really about what are we going to do and moving forward. But it's about our theory of change, of how we're going to work within the network to be able to create change so that we can achieve the great stride.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Given space for anyone else who would like to comment. Peter?
Yeah, I like this, Wendy. Particularly the last bullet, strengthen connection and alignment. I think we have an opportunity to, I think, be in conversation with a lot of the people that are in our network, and to be, to learn from them, to, be influenced by them, and then bring that back. I feel like I want to know what people think about this, and be in dialogue with them and have my own thinking evolve based on their feedback. So I'm looking forward to that part. But I think that makes sense. We should be out in community and being in dialogue. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Kelly?
Yeah, I really appreciate the roadmap and the rules. Also, just a if I think the language of backbone organization, I wonder if you might speak to that just a little bit more, and this could not matter at all, but I know that if I agree that Thriving Together is a backbone organization. I know there's like the CHAI is also looked to as a backbone organization. I know Maria in the Food Council and Sue in the digital equity work. A lot of us within this network are then backbone organizations. And just, does that make sense, or is there how do we think about it?
Yeah, you're exactly right, because Sue and I have talked about this, the being the backbone organization for the digital equity work, and what does that mean? And there's definitely different layers as the way I see it as a background. We're really on that regional, and so we're holding it, providing that infrastructure a lot for the CHIs and the regional coalitions and some of the network partners that are coming through the learning sessions, and that kind of holding that bigger picture. If I go a layer down, you're holding it, the CHIs are holding it for the county levels, very, very same work. The issue-based are doing it for their coalition, because you have your own network. It's why we call it network of networks, so to speak. You're holding your network together. Thriving Together is really holding that bigger picture. We're providing the space for the Stewardship Council to come together. There is some funding and some jointly bringing together all those different coalitions for the joint advocacy work. So it's kind of that layered approach. I'm not saying we are the only backbone. And I probably should have differentiated that role. So thank you for bringing that up. I think it's important when you look at a backbone organization, you're supposed to have that 50,000 foot. You can see where everyone's working. and you're able to make those connections. And so we can do it as Veronica talks to individual organizations that are joining the network. She can easily make connections where people are doing work or need to make connections with different sectors. She can do those warm handoffs. I believe the CHIs and the regional coalitions are doing this exact same because they can see how the different organizations are work together where there's some synergy. Claire?
Just a clarifying question. So the three topical coalitions you mentioned, the Food Council, TREAD, and the digital access, are
Mhm.
those or did you name those specific coalitions because they've like explicitly adapted the vital conditions as a framework? Is that, I was just thinking because I know of like a dozen coalitions, but are those okay?
Yes, I did name them partly because they're funded through Thriving Together's work, and they've adopted the vital conditions to spread that to and have agreed to do that work through the lens of the vital conditions.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
John, did you want to add anything about the backbone?
No, I think you said it well. I think we all have similar roles, but in different parts of this network of networks. And so we're trying to kind of collaborate and coordinate more so than try to duplicate efforts across it. And Claire, I appreciate your comment too, because we don't assume that we have an exhaustive list of coalitions out there. So I think that is going to be kind of a watch point, and a thought process in the future on how we kind of continue to expand or bring other coalitions into these kinds of conversations. It's a good starting point. It's probably not the end.
Mhm. I would also wonder, and it's something that we are trying to we've had conversations of working ourselves out of. If Thriving Together goes away, what happens to the network? In our ideal world, if Thriving Together goes away, the network stands on its own and still continues moving forward and doing the work. And at this point, I think that if Thriving Together went to where there's parts of the network that will continue moving forwards, but some parts will fall away.
And
It doesn't have the strength of it quite yet.
Wendy, that's a good point. That kind of leans into that backbone component, right? We're just providing support for a specific component of the network, just like everyone else's in differing ways. And so if we go away, the network might need support. It could actually come from another organization in the end. Like you could have a new backbone helping provide the network support. It doesn't have to be, I'm not saying we are pulling out. I'm just saying it doesn't have to be thriving together in that position.
All right, let's move on. I'm watching the time too. I thought we'd get a little bit further, but I do appreciate the comments, and I do think that we've done some level setting that's really going to build on the conversation as we continue to move forward. So again, I wanted to reiterate that we're not starting over, that we're building on what we've done. Um, Back in 2023, 2022, 2023, when all these conversations started, there was a change model created. This was before the summit, before learning sessions, before the well-being survey, before we had anything, right? And this is the individuals who were at the table initially saying, this is what we think. This is how we think we can make change. And there really was the focus on socializing the vital conditions because no one knew the term at that time. And it was about building the network. So we're going to socialize it. We're going to start to get people to come together who say, yes, I buy into this. So that's what then created this partner agreement that I did send out so you can take a look at what those levers are a little bit more in depth. But it was really about convening, measuring, and identifying opportunities for collective action. So that's really not superficial, but it didn't dive deep enough. I will say that. So it was great to get us started. It was great for this initial phase that we've been in and how we've grown, and we've done a lot. And we've done a lot in the last couple of years too about growing the network, not just in numbers, but in how we're working together and how we're working together differently and how we're thinking about our work through the lens of the vital conditions. So, a lot of great work. What I'm saying now is, sorry, can we head back to the Merging Futures document? I did want to honor the work that the CHIs, before I look ahead, I wanted to honor the work that the CHIs and Thriving Together did back in last year as we were learning our dance and how we're working together. Because as Kelly pointed out, there's so much overlap between the CHIs and Thriving Together, one regional, one county. And so there was a document created. I sent it out yesterday also, but it basically is like, here is we have a shared regional vision and action item. So this is what we're wanting for the future. This is what came out of that work. We're fostering the village mindset of we're all in this together. So no matter who you are, no matter what county you live in, we're doing this through shared values. And we all want meaningful use and sharing of data to drive investments that balance out urgent services and upstream conditions. Right now, we have a lot of our funds over in the urgent services. How do we start to shift a little bit of that back to the upstream work? And Maria, I get your comment earlier about the scarcity mindset too, of there's only so many dollars to go around, and how can I even shift from urgent services to upstream work when I'm just trying to keep my lights on? But if we're going to do this, this will lead to visible results, spurring spread throughout the county in a deeper way. So we're going to have more people are thriving because they have regular access to the vital conditions. There's going to be regional assets that are being leveraged for multi-solving and growing belonging and civic muscle. And we're going to start to see measurable impact, short-term changes, and longer-term outcomes at multiple levels. So this is what came out of the conversations last year that we want to continue to build on as we create this theory of change. Now everyone close your eyes as Stacy fast forwards back to the looking ahead slide. Sorry, I had these a little bit out of order when we started going through this. So if we start to look ahead, what we want to do is now the vehicle we had to get us started is no longer we need something bigger. We've grown. So we're going to go from a Kia to now an SUV, right? We need something bigger, something faster, something that's broader, something that's going to get us deeper into where we really want to go. And so we are really wanting to create a change model that will create that culture change, that will shift the mental model from crisis to upstream even more so that we've done. And we'll start to provide guardrails for funding opportunities that have more of an impact and for decision making. What we're trying to do is when we talk about the great stride, which everyone was on board with the great stride, there was some varying degrees of like, is 20 points the right points? Is it this? Is it that? Yes, having a measurable goal is where everyone stood. Let's have a measurable goal, but let's define how we're going to meet that goal, is what I heard from multiple people. So that's kind of where this theory of change now lies, is what are we going to do now, or what can we do as a network? This is our think tank. Thank all of you on this call, the think tank, strategic thinking hats on now. As I'm going to start to turn it over to Monty to start to lead us in that conversation about introducing an actionable theory of change and what that's going to take and what that could look like well in the future. And we'll continue after today the conversations more in our next meeting in September. So Monty, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. Our timing is a little off because we had some great conversation ahead of time, but we can shift a little bit, and I'm good with that.
Yeah, I think we don't need these questions because, yeah, thank you. Um, yeah, just really appreciating the thoughtfulness, Wendy, that you put out there that kind of led to this meeting and kind of where we are. And just to double click on, I'm looking at the screen and I know Peter was there in the beginning. It's not to suggest you're so old, Peter, but there were a number of folks and Alan came on. So all the folks that are on the screen have a really different vantage point and different experience of what is in place now. And as you suggest, Wendy, that Kia that was built was not an easy first lift, trying to think about convening, socializing folks. So what I hear in your feedback with the one-on-ones and what I experience in the summit is that there is an appetite for doing something collective at even greater intensity with intentionality, have even greater impact at a lot of different levels. And, the vehicle that kind of got us here is not the vehicle that is going to be, it's not going to set us up to have that deeper impact, that deeper spread. And so I think that when we are using these terms somewhat interchangeably, like what is an actionable theory of action, or it is that what is a change model for what we would do collectively that would kind of get to that different action. And so we were going to start a little bit of that conversation in some small groups, but it doesn't feel like we have enough time to do that and to do it well. But what I would be really curious to hear for a moment, if you don't mind, as we're thinking about a process to kind of build out that next change model is in the very beginning, Wendy used, and a number of you have talked about a network being a movement. And I think it relates a little bit to Maria's good question, or, is this a strategic plan? We have coalitions. When we talk about building a movement for thriving, what does movement mean? What is the difference between creating a movement versus a coalition in your minds? When you hear the term movement, what is it? There's no wrong answer, by the way. I'm just curious how the term movement is striking you as we build a change model around a movement.
Go
Yeah,
ahead, Maria.
Maria.
Yeah, you know, for me, when I hear that, I think it's the coalition that is generating the movement.
Hmm. The coalition. And what are the attributes? What does movement mean to you?
It's actionable. Like there's
Something.
actually, yeah. So, there might be a plan, there's like some actionable steps that need to be taken, and then there's an outcome that can be measured saying, hey, we moved the needle on this.
Yeah, thank you.
And that's a cultural shift, right? Like that includes everyone. That's the community, it's the coalition, along with the community that is the body of the movement. Like it's completely embodied by the entire community.
Yeah, it's this broad spread, that culture shift. Yeah, Kelly, what's coming up for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think similarly, I think of like rowing in the same direction, that we're moving together. There is some collective connection, but that we're stronger together. And I can use the negative example to say, there can be like I have 200 people, 250 people on my email list. We're just individual nodes, really doing individual work around the county in powerful ways. But what is it, how could we actually see ourselves as part of something bigger than just those individual dots? Um,
Mm,
so there's something in that too.
yeah, see hands going up, and yeah, seeing Dr. Wallace, people moving in the same direction on kind of an agreed upon goal, the striving together, agreed upon kind of North Star. And John, yeah, I see it changing hearts and minds so that everyone, I mean, I think for me, John, I mean, interpret that as the culture change, literally new ways of seeing. How about you, Peter? We can see you now.
For me, it's all those things, and just tagging on to what Kelly said about people seeing themselves as part of something, and for me, it's also language. In other words, this vital conditions framework just becomes integrated into the language that we use about community health and belonging. And so, organizations that saw themselves as singularly focused are now seeing themselves on that wheel and how they're contributing to a broader whole. So it's, you know, the more we use it, the more the vital conditions framework just becomes part of the language, like we use, unemployment or GDP or any of those things that we measure about populations and communities. This becomes something that we use.
Yeah. Yeah, that your comment there, Peter, it's my curiosity. So if we're creating a new change model or evolving a change model, what is it if we're trying to create a movement that needs to be a part of it? So I'm hearing for you that part of a movement is a common language, a common way of seeing, and back to Maria's point, something that is actionable. I see myself in this and I have a way of seeing differently and maybe acting differently. Is that saying too much? And I hope you're not driving on the left hand of the side. You're not in England, are you? Oh, got a very savvy driver. What other attributes, just as we're thinking about building the change model, what does a movement need in order to be successful? Yeah, Maria.
Yeah, shared leadership and shared accountability. Because it's like you can have a coalition, but if it's run by like a couple of leaders, you're going to go down. Like needs to be everyone's got to be on board, not just like in the dream phase, but in the action phase as well. I feel that's important.
Yeah. Yeah, this whole idea, which I think this question John may remember and Peter too, that you all started with was how do we create a way to distribute leadership? How do we spread leadership? And that became how do we create more and more stewards that see that they're seeing their role and their leadership, not just waiting for policymakers or this, heads of organizations to lead things. Um, Dr. Wallace is saying, yeah, do we have a shared set of metrics? I think one of the things that, and again, maybe Wendy has alluded to this, a great stride goal. Metrics is another form of language for us, but it also has the advantage of saying, are we making progress? Are things adding up? And I think that's true that movements have different ways of saying, do we really have a way of seeing how things are adding up? And we don't quite have that yet, but we got some measures in place. Wendy, I don't know if you want to add to that kind of as you've been thinking about kind of measurement and great strides. And no worries if not.
Mhm.
What Curious, what other things do we want to be putting in place if we're really trying to create a distributed movement? I see Alan put something in there, and the community action is a movement.
I
Yeah,
had just one quick thing to add, kind of on the what does it need to be successful? I feel like when movements initially kind of spark, they typically have pioneers that already have some degree of credibility, and trust within communities. Um,
Hmm.
that kind of people are already kind of on board with those people. I don't think it's a necessity, but I think it definitely helps with traction.
Mhm.
Hmm. Yeah. Maria, I see your hands up. I just, for a moment, Brian, I mean, we hear this, we move at the speed of trust, right? This has kind of become a popular adage. And we are operating in an environment in our country right now, in every one of our communities, where we have some of the lowest levels of trust we've had in a long time. And when we have lots of division and low levels of trust, I think it makes people reluctant to do something bold and innovative. And the counter is true in our experience that having the types of people that you're talking about that hold trust, and that's going to be different for different groups, is integral to really having a movement that goes anywhere right now. So high trust relationships become super important. And I just want to pull the thread and pass it back over to you, Maria, that a lot of what Wendy was sharing and what you all said in the past is we need relationships and we need systems change, not either or. We need learning and we need action. So these things they're interrelated, right? And so that's a different way of thinking than our kind of traditional top-down coalitions, right? Sometimes do. Maria, please.
Yeah, yeah, Ryan, I really like what you're saying as far as the pioneers, like, whose shoulders are we standing on as we do this work? Because we always are. right? And like how do we lift them up, and like how do we share those success stories of what's already happening? Because I think very often it's like if you think of a movement, okay, you've developed that shared vision, like you've decided what that North Star is, you're going to go in that direction. But there's folks out there that have been doing this longer than we have, and to really like lift them up, hear their success stories, so we can all see that there is a path forward. We're just building on it. So it maybe feels a little less overwhelming, and also like you have to bring the energy to a movement. How are you going to bring the energy? Like to get a big movement going, like you have to start out with that energy. You have to create that momentum. And if the people are already out there doing it, like lift them up so we can like draft off of them and just like kind of get us going.
I feel like it's really funny to hear you say that because when I had made that comment, I was kind of thinking of you and the work that you've been doing with the Food Council across the North Central Washington region. Because, I mean, you have so many people involved, and I really don't think that it's just because so many people care about food access. Like, that's very obvious. It's a very important issue. But I think people are so energized by you, and they know you, and they trust you, and they trust in your ability to lead the group. Like, people in Grant County, there were lots of people that didn't know you, and we were like, this is Maria and she's awesome. And they're like, let us be a part of this thing because she's so trusted. And so it's just really funny to hear you say that because I feel like you totally embody that spirit with the group that you're leading right now. I mean, if we can just like, and I see that across, there's other things. And I think when you think about different facets within the vital conditions and work people are doing, some of those organizations kind of come to mind, like people that you know are going to get people excited about the work. Like NCW Tech Alliance, they do such a great job at being able to get people excited about a very specific body of work, right? So it's like, how do you weave all of those things together when you're talking about such a broad spectrum of topics and things that we can uplift our communities on? So
Mhm. That's a beautiful exchange. And I think, yeah, that sentiment is shared, Ryan, around kind of Maria as an example of a community steward who inspires a lot of folks. Sue, I saw you smiling. I don't know if you were looking at a joke on your computer or just wanted to see if somebody who is a movement starter, of sorts, if you have anything you want to add.
I do. My smile is because Ryan, I mean, it makes me happy to hear Maria and Ryan. It's inspiring to hear you all speak with the passion. So you're just bringing joy.
Yeah. So,
Monty, I would like to hear from Alan a bit. He talks about the collective impact model that leads a successful movement, and he's been an advocate of it. Can you speak more to it as you're thinking about this work?
I just think it's a way to help people come together and identify a common objective, and that's that moving motion forward. And so, in order to move something forward, you have to have that collective, or for another phrase, that collaborative uh, force behind it. And that's just what I find in the beauty of the collective impact model. There's no one organization, just as Sue and Maria can attest to, that can move forward either access to technology or access to food, but it takes, somebody else mentioned in the chat there, a village, and I just really admire that it is a network of networks that move something. And that's, I think, the success of this region is our willingness to come together and set aside that it's only us that can do something. We know that's not true. And I think that's the beauty of our region and the work that we're able to accomplish here.
Thank you. I think that a great example, and I can bring it because I've been so close to the work, is the digital equity work and the vision that Sue set up is here's this goal, and everyone started to see themselves in that goal and were able to say, I can do this to reach this goal, and I can do that. And it didn't have to be this huge thing. It could be, hey, I'm an ISP provider and I can help my clients figure out their router, where their router is, or I can do this on the website, or I can set up a computer in a coffee shop. But I think it's all those little things that are collectively coming together, almost like this ripple effect, right? That start to come together, that have this collective impact, right? That collective action that moves the needle forward. And then it, I guess, goes back to Maria, adds to that energy and excitement because then people start to see it and they want to be a part of that because then they start to have FOMO on that. Sue, do you want to add?
I might just because it's being called out, the digital access work, I have had such a transformation. So if I can be humble or be vulnerable with you all, to show you how my thinking has shifted in the vital conditions framework. I think when we launched our commitments campaign, we were thinking with a definition of, we want everybody to have access to skills, devices, and connectivity. We want them to benefit from technology resources. That is a Tech Alliance definition that is apart from the vital conditions, not fully, but we could have landed it in a couple of those spaces. I think as we attach it this year, and what I want to try to push on is this idea that that was a very functional definition. And if I push it into the vital conditions framework, it becomes, more of a structural definition. And it says the positioning of it, right? It says digital access is an essential thing for people to really be able to get to wellness because we know digital access it creates barriers for lifelong learning and information to a natural environment that feels safe and accessible. And there's so much across the board that we were not unlocking because our definition, it's still meaningful and we're still aligned with what we want to get out of it. But I want to reposition it so that it feels like it's truly unlocking that well-being. And the way we're trying to do that you cannot do without inviting others to help you shape what that looks like. I can't see it. We can't mobilize resources that we don't know about, and we have experts in our ecosystem. So I think that's maybe if I can be that vulnerable, like being a steward of that piece of our puzzle is a shift that we have to do in real time, and it's messy and we don't get it wrong. And we're so grateful for Wendy and the folks that are on this call for helping us be able to shape that thinking.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, I appreciate the conversation, and I want to recognize a little bit as we're talking through this and talking about like this theory of change as part of the network. I recognize that a number of you are probably going to have to wear multiple hats. One, kind of the hat of how you're stewarding this conversation as a stewardship council member in your role. I think a lot of you also lead these networks that are part of the network of networks. And so as we're kind of like thinking of that theory of change, it's not just like driving together as vital conditions network theory of change, but how are all of these coalitions and networks contributing to this theory of change as a whole, and what different parts and roles do we all play to really create a place that's thriving, and how do we do it collectively together? So I feel like I've just heard that throughout this conversation and continue to like emphasize you're all here both to help in this stewardship council role, but also to think about how your networks can also be part of contributing to this broader theory of change.
Definitely have folks wearing lots of hats, John, I think, and there's just going to be more. And I think the one thing that Wendy and you and I and others have talked about is how do we really support you all in the leadership roles you're already playing and not create more extra meetings, but this is additive to the work that you're already doing. And Wendy and I talked briefly around what the process could look like. I think this meeting, as Wendy had suggested, was largely a level set for starting to really dig into reimagining an actionable change model, a theory of action that actually has the deeper impact and some of the beautiful language Sue, you and others have just used. So I'm wondering, we might put out some ideas before that September meeting. If you all, we don't want to give you too much homework, just so we can hit the ground running, if you will. And I think the goal is that by the end of this year, this isn't the only group. This is a movement. We need to have a lot of others that you all would help shape a little bit of that early container that we could start to test out with other people within the network, the CHIs, at the summit and other places. So this is a co-creation process. But you all as the stewardship team would really be playing a lead role in helping to kind of create some of the boundaries by which we kind of fill that container. So we'll loop back with you before the September meeting so that we can really make sure that we're just jumping right into kind of reimagining and co-creating the next version of this. And I'm looking at you, Wendy, to see if that still makes sense and if anything you'd add.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I did just want to ground us, so that we're all coming from it as we start to create this theory of change. I've always been told everyone agrees until you actually define it. And so I think having defined it, I think we're all going to be now coming from the same level playing field. And as we're having these conversations, we can build on that and really create something that can then be tested, as Monty said, within the rest of the network that could eventually bring that energy that Maria spoke about earlier. So thank you all for the great conversation as always. And you'll be hearing from us and then plan on that September meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Carol.
Y'all.
Thank you.
Well, you set them up for lots of conversation, Wendy.
Yes.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think that was a
So
good decision I think we have some ideas for how we can really set up that September conversation.
good. Yeah, it was definitely some good conversation, and I even in that some of the difference in how people were thinking too. So
Yeah.
I think it's good to hear for them to hear each other.
Yeah. And they're just forming as a team. That's the thing that is so important is that there's so many different players that conversations like that have them feel like they are part of something and that they are kind of the next leg of the evolution here together.
Yeah, I wonder. So I'm just gonna plant the seed. We don't have to really discuss it, but we're gonna have a September meeting. We're gonna have an October summit. I'm wondering about coming together in person for a longer meeting in November.
I'm thinking the same thing. I was thinking that
Okay.
yesterday talking.
I'm saying that out loud so that we can get something on the calendar.
That sounds good. And of course, we're going to potentially be out there, right, in November for the Belonging and Civic Muscle cohort harvest.
For the vital conditions grantee harvest. Yeah.
So we could think about if that the day before or day after that might work.
100%. So that's November. I'll look and see when that date is. I'm sure it's on my calendar, but
Okay.
I'll find that on my calendar and look. And I will have Meg fill out the rest of the Stewardship Council to see when works for them.
Yeah. That sounds great. And as we get closer, we might even think about it. Is it primarily the Stewardship Council, or there's some other couple handful of other network folks or any of the folks we want to pull in? But we can be thinking about that as we start to kind of build this process.
Perfect.
It looks like, Wendy, you also, we might need to think about the 9th being the stewardship team or stewardship council, because Wednesday is Veterans Day and some of your partners may have Veterans Day off and you all may as well.
Tis true, but we have a governing board meeting on Monday. But maybe that I'll look and see how many of them are our board members. And I mean, well, I guess they are because Ruben and Ryan, all of them are.
And it looks like Monty and I are also flexible on the 12th. So Monty, again, not wanting to speak for you and your family for Wednesday, Veterans Day, but
Yeah, that could be good.
if we
Yeah,
need
and there's a stewardship council meeting already there from 9:30 to 11, so maybe it's something that we can extend. Perfect.
All right. Well, good
Thank
work today
you.
setting us up, Wendy. That was super helpful level set.
Great. Thank you for that. And I think I feel better too moving forward.
All right.
Thanks,
We'll be in
Stacy,
touch.
for your help.
to.
Bye.